From the San Diego Union-Tribune, this is The Conversation.
I'm Abby.
And I'm Luis.
We know you're flooded with news, memes, and all kinds of information each day.
And we know that can be a little overwhelming.
But if there's one story that will get you talking, tweeting, and caught up for the day, this is the one. Hello and welcome to a very special Comic-Con edition of The Conversation podcast.
Hey there, it's Luis here.
I'm Abby, and we have two very special guests. We will let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Lori Weisberg, and I'm a longtime business writer at the paper and cover Comic-Con from time to time.
Welcome.
Hi, Phil Molnar. I'm also a business reporter here and cover Comic-Con from time to time.
Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining us here at the special podcast edition, Comic-Con edition for the podcast, the Conversation podcast. We're going to be talking about Comic-Con and I guess like the big implications, the big news, the big story of Comic-Con and the absences of who's not going to be here and what that means for fans and for the city.
Yeah, so some of the biggest news, I mean, the schedules haven't been out, but some of the news that you do get, there's immediate reaction to it. It sort of sets the tone early for what the convention might look like this year when you hear some of these releases that come out. And the biggest one by far that everybody's talking about is what, Luis?
HBO's Game of Thrones and Westworld is not going to be here for the first time at Comic-Con, and Marvel is going to be skipping Hall H altogether. Hall H is that big hall where they make huge announcements, they basically break news.
Yeah, and we should add that Marvel will be having a couple panels. I looked at the schedule today, and they'll have smaller ones than normal, one related to Spider-Man, one related to X-Men. But yeah, Hall H is always where the big surprises happen, the cast, the creators, always a big scene. And particularly for Marvel, as I've been over the years, the people who are camping out outside most often that I meet are for Marvel. But what was all of your reactions to hearing about this when it came out?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear from Lori and Phil.
An initial gasp, probably like some of the fans. I was surprised, and then I thought back over the years to every time a certain studio didn't show up, a certain film didn't debut. It seemed to be often much ado about nothing because then they showed up later. So I wondered, is this more the same, or is this foreboding of something to come? What did you think, Phil?
Yeah, well, so last year I had gone to the D23 in Anaheim, which is like Disney's version of Comic-Con. And it was like so much of a better fan experience for me being there than Comic-Con. It wasn't as busy. Pretty much everyone got into their Hall H style like event. And since Disney owns Marvel and Star Wars, the two biggest pop culture franchises, it was like they got to have the cast of both movies come out, and it was so great and all this stuff. So one of the things I've been thinking about since I went to D23 last year, and I've been seeing these Star Wars celebrations get bigger and bigger, which is like Star Wars has its own Comic-Con. This kind of idea that like, why does Disney need to have, why do they need to put up with San Diego Comic-Con when they can have their own? So I've been kind of thinking about this since last year, and that's a theory I had that didn't really turn out, but maybe not. I don't know. But that's been on my mind a lot since I went to D23, how good of an experience it was.
So maybe an HBO con coming up in our future.
Yeah, I mean, why
Game
not?
Game of Thrones con.
Yeah, Game of Thrones could probably pull it off.
Yeah.
Yes.
Westworld alone could have its own Comic-Con.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, we should note that Marvel did bypass San Diego Comic-Con in 2011 and 2015. Game of Thrones, however, has been there every year since 2011. But we do have their explanations for why they're not coming. Various reasons.
Yeah, and they did release a statement. I'll read it real quickly. Due to production schedules and air dates for Game of Thrones and Westworld, these series will not be presented at San Diego Comic-Con this summer. HBO has a long-standing relationship with SDCC, and we are very grateful for the fans' enthusiastic response over the years. We look forward to returning in the future. So there's that indication that, yeah, they, like you said, sometimes they show up, sometimes they don't, and then they come back.
Okay, and what about Marvel?
Marvel had a little bit of a different story because, they are showing up. They are coming to San Diego Comic-Con, but they're just not going to do Hall H. They said that they're going to do this whole 10th anniversary panels and materials, but not necessarily doing Hall H.
Okay. And just looking back at last year, we had Game of Thrones talking about Season 7 in their panel, and Marvel revealed a huge number of interesting movies and such that are coming out, including Ant-Man and the Wasp, Captain Marvel, Thor Ragnarok, and Black Panther. So clearly they've had a pretty big presence. Last year, all of the buzz was, not all of it, but a lot of the buzz was about those two. So the question is, without that buzz, what will it be like this year? We saw immediately as the reactions were coming out that a lot of questions were raised about, is this a trend? Do we have to expect this in years to come? What is going on? So Luis has a few tweets to read.
There was definitely a lot of people freaking out over this, especially over the whole HBO thing. Someone said SDCC, hashtag SDCC is actually starting to look less fun. No HBO or Marvel, who else? Is there something behind the scenes that Comic-Con maybe is struggling with? Something political? Don't get it. The same reactions. What is going on with SDCC this year? Game of Thrones and Westworld. This is from Aaron Saggers. Game of Thrones and Westworld skipping SDCC 2018, and Marvel isn't doing Hall H panel with all these other events for studios to break news without sharing the same news cycle. Has SDCC lost some of the power it once had? And that's actually a really interesting question, because I did pose that question to the people who have covered Comic-Con for a number of years. Do you think Comic-Con is losing its luster?
No. I mean, obviously we can see, time will tell, and let's take a look at next year's schedule. But no, and I think Phil and I both did talk to industry observers, bloggers, and they say that, kind of like the statements you just read, it's a cyclical nature, that sometimes they don't have something to show, and if they maybe kind of have something to show, it's not in the best shape, and so they don't want to disappoint a fan base of more than 100,000 people that goes viral on social media. You have to be very careful of what gets out and be very prepared. So that's part of it. I know that Phil talked to one blogger who talked about that, right?
Yeah, I mean, they were people that cover this industry were like really adamant that this is not like the crisis for Comic-Con, that things are going down. I mean, even though I might still have some suspicions about what's going on, I mean, that's kind of it's kind of what Lori talked about. I think the last time that Marvel didn't go, it was rumored before it was going to start that they were going to announce that like Joaquin Phoenix or somebody like that was going to play Doctor Strange, and there was negotiations going on leading up to it. Now, what happened was that year, I think it was like 2014, and so 2014 Marvel has their big Hall H panel, and they really didn't have a whole lot going on, and it was kind of like, Marvel's in Hall H, but there's not like this huge announcement about who's going to play Doctor Strange. And the next year they ended up not going. So I kind of wonder about like this idea that a lot of the bloggers and industry people talk about, where it's like, well, if you don't have a lot to show off, why go? Mm-hmm. And Kevin Feige, from the head of Marvel Studios, he's already come out and said that, we don't want to make any big announcements until after the next Avengers movie about what we're up to.
Interesting.
I could go on about that, and you had mentioned before about like Marvel Studios or Marvel still coming. I think it's kind of weird industry thing, because Marvel Studios, the film division, has really been broken off from the rest of Marvel. It's still, everything's under Disney, but there's been kind of a power struggle with the head of Marvel Entertainment and the head of the comics. So the comic books are all going to be there. They're going to have their panels. Also, the Netflix TV shows are anticipated to be there. But all that stuff is really different. There's no real comparison to Marvel Studios. They're talking 19 films now, billions of dollars in money worldwide. Like trying to even compare Game of Thrones to it isn't even fair. So with them not being there, it's a big thing. And, one thing I was wondering, I think Lori will get into it later, But am I getting too long-winded here?
No.
Okay, all right, fine, all right. I just go.
You got all the good info.
But it's crazy because like Marvel Studios, their explanation is that scheduling. We don't want to announce anything after Phase 4 or our next phase of films, but Marvel has like essentially 4 films out in between the Comic-Cons. They've got Ant-Man coming out next week, which will still be in theaters and still probably looking to gather some free marketing as Comic-Con comes out. And then you've got coming out next year the sequel to Spider-Man, the new Spider-Man movie, the new Captain Marvel movie, and the sequel to Avengers. I mean, if you just went out there and said, here's a prop from one of these movies, that should probably do enough. And that is like...
That's what confuses me.
Yeah, there's a colossal amount of free marketing that comes from this. But no matter what we hear from people, it's like everybody that covers this, that might be like what my gut's telling me. But everyone that covers it, all the industry people say, nah, this is just they come back. They're gone 1 year, they come back even better. They're gone 1 year, they come back even better. So
yeah, and that's
what
interesting because like some people who were noticing that Marvel was not going to have like its big Hall H presence said that DC should come in and just steal the show. I mean, and they are going to have Aquaman?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we'll get to that a little bit later in this episode. But while we're on the subject of the sort of financial return on this, Lori and Philip did do a piece on this for the San Diego Union-Tribune. We should shout out that we'll have plenty of coverage during Comic-Con. I think the 4 of us will probably all be involved with that. So check that story out if you can get to it. But they did do a lot of reporting to look into this issue, and Lori found some interesting information about how valuable it is to go do one of these panels.
Right. I was a little surprised. I mean, obviously, we didn't get HBO to call us back, but Warner Brothers, their television group, did call us back. And I should point out, just for a little context, a few years ago, there was a lot of a similar kind of hand-wringing about no-shows among the big film studios. Mm-hmm. But at that time, we talked about, but hey, there's this trend more toward television, obviously HBO being part of that, it was gravitating, the Hall H was gravitating more toward television like it had not been in the past. And Warner Brothers brings 20, they have 22 shows in their portfolio, and they're going to be highlighting a lot of them. So it's a big deal for them. And they do for their annual report, they look at return on investment each year from Comic-Con, and they measure it a couple different ways. So across its 22 shows last year, they said that Comic-Con was responsible for $30.5 million in audience reach.
That's huge.
That is, but even bigger than that, they are able to reach a global audience of more than 3 billion. And that's not just during Comic-Con. What they mean is throughout the year, is that every kind of mention that is still out there on social media is counted. And I kind of knew what she meant. I thought, well, after Comic-Con, it just kind of falls off. But I have Comic-Con alerts, Google alerts. The whole year I'm getting Google alerts on Comic-Con because of a show that was at Comic-Con and a screening or whatever. Mm-hmm. So you can see why it's still valuable to them.
Yeah, so the studios that are holding out, and they'll be missing out on that opportunity, I guess. But you never know at Comic-Con. There's always surprises. They say these things, they put these releases out, but it'll be interesting to see if, kind of like you mentioned, there will be any at least marketing or any sort of pop-up.
And you never know. You might see an underdog, a show or movie that's an underdog make a big splash, or later on become a big hit.
Yeah, so we actually interviewed a spokesperson for Comic-Con about this, and I just want to play his statement really quick. This is David Glanzer, spokesperson for San Diego Comic-Con International.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have Paramount, we have Warner Brothers Television, we have a slew of people who are coming, and not every studio comes every year. And I think those people who write stories to say, oh, maybe the bloom is off the rose or something, well, they haven't looked at the history, and it's a savvy company that doesn't bring something to the fans and to the attendees because they feel they have to sell something, but will sit a year out because they don't have something they think the audience will appreciate, or it isn't finished yet. So do I expect those companies to come back? I do. I mean, they have in the past. But the smart ones won't come in and sell something to the audience that the audience doesn't want. And I've seen a panel like that before, and it's not a pretty sight because our people are vocal.
Thoughts about that?
Well, I think he's echoing the things we heard. I mean, we didn't want to be kind of an ad for Comic-Con, so we reached out to a lot of people, and we also talked to the editor of Entertainment Weekly, and they cover that convention really heavily, and they too agreed. I mean, there weren't many dissenters, but I guess, as I said, the proof will be next year and the year after if these no-shows return. It's just that HBO had such a long run, but really, when you talk to the experts, they weren't ready to count them out. And we talked to, I know you're probably going to get to this, but we talked to the company that puts on New York Comic Con, and they've been there, they said, and they weren't surprised. They said that happens to them too. So don't be ready to write off a Comic Con in San Diego because of some no-shows.
Yeah, it was difficult because most people we talk to cover Comic-Con quite a bit. They're in the weeds, they know everything, and no matter how hard you tried, no one was willing to say, I think something's going on wrong at Comic-Con right now. And, even though, like Lori had those numbers, the amazing reach you get, maybe sometimes the idea is, bad buzz is worse than, I guess, I don't know. You don't want bad buzz coming out of a panel. I'm still a little skeptical that there'd be any bad buzz coming out of just having like the star of Captain Marvel come out on stage, or maybe just somebody from Spider-Man. But, that's apparently what everybody says. So what are you going to do about it,
True. Do you guys feel like over the years you've seen any sort of talk like this where a panel has come to an end and people walk out and they aren't impressed?
I'm not so sure about the panels themselves, but I remember, Phil, we were talking about, and it's in the story too, about the two films that had great promise coming out of Comic-Con and were kind of bombs. It was Snakes on a Plane and Scott Pilgrim.
Snakes on a Plane and Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Right.
Those are the two examples that everybody gives of like the crowds freaking out, loving it. The buzz coming out was huge, and then they weren't successes at the box office. So I don't know what to say about that,
Back to the point that you made about New York Comic Con, I think something else that you all covered in your reporting is the explosion of cons, the explosion of similar events, and even, as you mentioned, D23?
Yeah, D23,
So what would you say that has to do with this?
Well,
if anything.
Oh, sorry. I'll go first, Lori. Sorry. I'll handle this.
You'll handle it.
So, yeah, I lived in New York City when New York Comic Con was getting started. And the year before, I think it was like 2008, there was two different comic conventions, the Big Apple Comic Con and the New York Comic Con. And then the year after, New York Comic Con merged with like an anime festival and just exploded. And it looks a lot like what Comic Con looks like today. So as the years have gone on, New York Comic Con continues to get bigger and bigger, and its profile raises quite a bit. And, so, I mean, that's probably probably the biggest competition or the biggest threat to San Diego Comic Con is this one in New York City. And, there is so much entertainment here in, San Diego, in Southern California, that I think it might be hard to compete. But then again, Marvel Comics is located in New York City, so that helps. But, there's also, we've got WonderCon, which is put on by the same people as San Diego Comic-Con. But there's other ones, too, like Wizarding World Chicago. That's another one I've been to. The Motor City Comic-Con, I went to that a whole bunch when I was younger. So these things have been around for years, but I think the difference was back in the day, it was like comic books and comic book creators, and maybe like Lou Ferrigno, who played the Hulk, was always there, like signing, but nothing like today where like big movies are the draw, or TV shows.
I should add that New York Comic Con, as big as it is, it has even more attendees than San Diego. Does not get Game of Thrones. Their big franchise is Walking Dead. They get every year.
Yeah. So I think that we should now definitely get into the Marvel versus DC portion of this. Everybody who, as soon as they talk about how Marvel's not going to be there, it's almost the same breath. The question is about DC being there. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So DC has had a presence at Comic-Con for a lot of years. Well, with their Dark Knight franchise, and then also like Green Lantern with Ryan Reynolds, and I think Jonah Hex panel maybe. But when we compare them, I think it's best to look at it like DC just really basically in the last few years have started their own like connected universe. So a movie comes out that kind of connects to the past one, unlike similar to what Marvel's doing right now. Like Marvel has 19 films and they all connect, which is amazing because it's never really been done before, and it's such a juggernaut. You've seen other like studios try and redo it. There was something called the Dark Universe that was supposed to be like the Mummy and Dracula and all that stuff. That didn't take off. You've seen X-Men try and like almost replicate that, even though X-Men was the first out the gate. So what we're seeing now with DC is they've tried to do their own connected universe, but it's not working out so well. You could see Justice League was kind of a bomb. Batman versus Superman, a lot of critics of that. Batman versus Superman, people didn't like it, but we're still talking about it. People still debate that. So what can you say about a movie if they're still talking about Suicide Squad, all this kind of stuff, with the lone exception of Wonder Woman being a big hit?
But it also
Shout out.
feels like a reactionary to Marvel because DC had Batman has had Batman for the longest time. It had the original Batman movies in the 80s and then the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. And then after Marvel started having this success with like all these sequels, then they suddenly start getting into that. That's kind of reactionary.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of critics like, their Justice League movie came out after like 4 connected movies. So it's like this idea that maybe DC didn't really earn it. But when you look at like connected universes that have ever existed, like movies that run together, still, I think DC's like the second most popular. So what they have right now is we know the Aquaman trailer is going to be there, and it's rumored that the stars of Wonder Woman and Shazam will be there as well. So this really is DC's moment to shine and really steal the spotlight.
As a Wonder Woman fan myself, I'm very interested to see how that plays out.
Yeah, Gal Gadot's rumored to be there, but we cannot confirm.
So maybe this will be DC's big year at Comic-Con. As anyone who's been to this event or cover it before will tell you, there's plenty to see and do. Even if the big powerhouse of Marvel isn't around, you'll still have plenty to go see. Great conversation here about whether it really will be looking different this year.
I was just going to add that
We'll find out.
One thing we mentioned is that there's also, the schedule's going to be coming out, and we'll
Yes.
report on each day.
We're waiting
But
desperately.
The big thing about Comic-Con, the fun thing, is the anticipation of the surprises.
Yep.
And because there are always those surprises, and we talked about some of those in our stories. But a big star that wasn't even planning to come, and they show up. So that's always something to look forward to.
Who knows? We could have Captain Marvel parading down Harbor Drive at some point.
I doubt it, but maybe we'll see. I mean, it's that's one crazy thing. Like Lori mentioned, some of the coolest stuff that's happened at Comic-Con over the years have been snuck into like some panel you didn't even see it coming.
Yeah.
Like we put in the story like The Hunt for Witch Mountain, a rock movie that I never saw and couldn't remember. That's when they debuted like Tron footage, Tron sequel. Everybody freaked out. And there was another one for like Legendary Pictures, something or the other. And that's where they debuted the first Godzilla footage of the reboot of Godzilla. So it's like sometimes you're just at a boring panel and then it's the biggest news out of Comic-Con all of a sudden. So
yeah, and like we said, Marvel's still having some panels, so we'll see what comes out of those. But as for the future of Comic-Con, will these panels pulling out have any sort of effect on that? It will remain to be seen. But what we also can talk about, and this is sort of a San Diego subject for those of you listening from around the country, but it means something to everybody who loves Comic-Con, loves coming to our beautiful city for it. Lori extensively covers, and I think sometimes Philip writes about it too. We do a lot of coverage here at the San Diego Union-Tribune of what will be going on with the convention center in years to come. There's a lot of political conversation that we can have here. We just wanted to have Lori give a little brief update to those of you who hope to come to Comic-Con in years to come?
So, as you all know, Comic-Con sells out every year and really fast because no more than this estimated 135,000 can attend over the 4 days in preview night. So it never gets bigger, and they say that's because, of the limitations of the convention center, although we've seen Comic-Con spread out to Gaslamp, to Petco, to some of the hotels. But the bottom line is the floor, the exhibit space, is not big enough for a larger convention. So for years and years, the city leaders, the tourism sector, the hoteliers have been trying to expand the convention center, but they need the money for it. So they are a big coalition is trying to qualify for the November ballot, an initiative that would raise our hotel tax to help pay for an expansion. And some of that money will also go for homeless housing and services and for repairing roads. We're waiting to see if that measure qualifies for the ballot. If it does, then the next big hurdle is to get 2/3 of the voters to say yes to that. And then we'll know. But for now, Comic-Con is under contract to be here through 2021. We know LA and Anaheim look jealously at San Diego and would love to have them. So
after
we'll
2021, if Comic-Con decides it wants to go to LA, they can go to LA.
That's right. But the
Another
city,
thing, leaving us for LA.
Yeah. So exactly. The city always tries to get a contract before that happens. So this will be a very interesting time this November.
There you have it. We will definitely be watching how this year's big holdouts affects Comic-Con in the years to come, but also what will happen to the convention center and the convention itself.
Yeah, and if you are at Comic-Con or going to Comic-Con, we definitely want to hear your thoughts on this year's Comic-Con and whether that's, whether it feels different for you or whether it just, it's just any other Comic-Con. I feel like the more I talk to people who know about this topic, the better I feel. I feel a little bit more confident about Comic-Con this year. So I'm not feeling so bummed out over Westworld or Game of Thrones not being here. So
I definitely had my major gasp as you did when this happened because I was expecting some really cool Captain Marvel. I was really looking forward to that, but I don't know. Maybe we'll see.
You made us feel better.
Oh.
We'll
and
see.
that was what was important today.
Yeah, so thanks for listening. Check out San Diego Union-Tribune.com for all our Comic-Con coverage. Tune in with us during the event. It's coming up here shortly. And we also have a few other episodes of this podcast about Comic-Con, interviews, coverage, tips you need to know, advice. So check it out in your favorite listening app, The Conversation with Abby and Luis.
Thanks for listening. The Conversation can be found online at SanDiegoUnionTribune.com/opinion and on Twitter at SDUTideas.
You can find me on Twitter at Abby Hamblin.
And I'm at Run Gomez.
Find more information about our podcast, including contact information, at sdut.us/conversation.
This has been a production of the UT Podcast Network, and thanks for listening.